Clean it properly, Lena. Useless women like you only deserve to crawl on my floor." That was the first thing I heard the moment I stepped into the house I myself had bought after 20 years away from home. And the person shouting those words was Derek Coleman, the son I raised, now standing there like a beast, stripped of all humanity. Lena, my daughter-in-law, was on her knees, her hands cracked, her eyes swollen red. But what choked me was the dark bruise running from her neck down to her shoulder, the mark of someone who had been strangled so many times her soul had forgotten how to breathe. When Derek raised his hand to slap his wife again, I could no longer stand still. In that moment, I understood one thing with crystal clarity. He had just crossed the final boundary of a mother who had returned to end every cruelty he'd built. Today, he would pay with his entire life. If you cannot tolerate seeing a woman being trampled the way Lena was, comment "no mercy." Hit follow now, because in the next part, I will show you exactly how I made Derek fall to his knees before justice. I am Marissa Coleman, a dark-skinned woman from the American South, 54 years old, with hands hardened after 20 years of working as a nurse in England. Those 2 decades away from home were for a reason many women would understand. I had to run. Run from an abusive ex-husband. Run from nights hiding in the bathroom because I feared a single footstep. Run from a past that choked me every time I closed my eyes. I left the United States to survive, to keep whatever was left of myself that Derek, my only son, never saw. I took every shift I could, from suburban hospitals to elder homes, saving every penny to send back to Derek and his wife Lena. I believed with everything I had endured that at least my son would have a better life than mine. I scraped together enough to buy them a $5 million house, a place I thought would be a real home where pain would end with my generation and never touch them again. 20 years later, I stood in front of that door as if facing the final page of my old life. I set my luggage down, my hands shaking with joy, worry, and hope that I would finally return to my family's embrace. I waited for footsteps, for someone running out, for a voice calling Mom, for the sound of a door swinging open. But the only thing I heard was a strange, repetitive sound scraping across the stone floor, like someone wiping it with exhaustion rather than effort. No greeting, no shadow of anyone, no warmth of a lived-in home. Only that sound echoing through the wide space, like the breath of an empty house. I stepped inside. The air was cold enough to make me wrap my arms around myself. The carpet I once mailed from England had been rolled up and shoved into a corner like something discarded. The family photos I had expected to see were gone, replaced by a strange, unsettling emptiness. A $5 million home should have been full of life, full of voices, full of movement, yet this place felt drained of everything human. I walked deeper into the living room and finally saw the source of the sound. Lena was kneeling on the stone floor. My daughter-in-law, the gentle woman I once embraced at her wedding, was bowing over the ground, her trembling hands gripping a cloth as if she were wiping away her own breath. Her long hair fell over half her face, but not enough to hide the exhaustion carved into her shoulders. Her wrists showed red marks, old and new, crossing over each other as if they had never been given a chance to heal. I called her name softly, just enough to reach her without startling her, but her whole body recoiled like a bird terrified of shadows. Lena looked up at me, eyes swollen, wet, as if she had lived too long in a world where apologizing for simply existing was normal. "Mom, please, don't call me loudly." Her voice was so small, it broke something inside me. I hadn't spoken loudly, I hadn't scolded, I hadn't urged her. I had only called her name, a simple call, a gentle one. Yet she reacted like someone who had lived under fear for so long that even a whisper felt like a threat. Right then, a cold truth settled over me. In the house I built with my own tears and bones, something had rotted. I looked at Lena, at her shaking hands, trying to finish wiping a streak across the floor, as though stopping for even 1 second would be a sin. This house was not missing laughter. It was missing freedom, missing warmth, missing even the basic dignity owed to a human being. And in that moment, I understood my return was not for reunion. It was to confront a truth I could never have imagined in 20 long years. My daughter-in-law was living like a maid in the very house I bought. I stepped further into the room, trying to keep my voice as soft as possible when I called Lena's name. I only wanted to get closer, to place a hand on her shoulder to comfort her, but the moment I bent down slightly to help her up, Lena jerked backward. It was an instinctive movement from someone who had endured far too much fear. Her eyes widened as if a single touch could drag her into some invisible punishment. I stopped in the middle of the large room, realizing the distance between Lena and me was not just a few steps. It was 20 years of silence. 20 years she had lived in a house that left no space for her own breath. Lena lowered her head, her voice so weak I almost didn't hear it. "Mom, I'm forbidden to talk for long." A short sentence, yet its weight dropped straight into my chest. I looked around the spacious house, the place I had sent money for with all my hopes, but now it had become a cage tightening around the life of a gentle woman. I took one more step, and Lena stepped back again, hiding her hands behind her as if shielding something she was terrified to let me see. At that moment, the sound of heels echoed from the staircase. Rhea appeared, looking at me with a coldness that felt like I had trespassed onto territory she claimed as her own. She crossed her arms, leaned against the railing, and her lips curled into a mocking smile. "Marissa, your daughter-in-law is very weak. We're teaching her to behave." Her voice was sharp, scraping like metal against metal. The way she emphasized the word teaching made a chill pass straight through me. Lena immediately bowed her head, lowered her hands, gripping the hem of her shirt as if any small movement might provoke Rhea's anger. The silence among the three of us stretched until I could hear my own breath echoing in the room. I moved around Lena before Rhea could react. Part of me wanted to see her face clearly, but more importantly, I had caught a glimpse of something when she pulled her sleeve earlier. Lena tried to hide it, but not quickly enough, and I could not ignore it. I gently lifted her arm. She flinched but didn't dare pull away. Under the thin skin were dark bruises layered on top of each other, patches spreading as if someone had gripped her hard enough to burst the blood beneath. Some bruises had already turned yellow, the mark of older pain. Others were fresh and deep red. No one needed to say a word. Those bruises told a story far longer than anything Lena could voice. I swallowed hard. These hands, which had tended to countless patients, trembled as they touched the wounds of my own daughter-in-law. Lena whispered, her voice like wind slipping through a doorway. "Please don't let them see you care about me." That sentence felt like someone had pressed their fingers around my heart. Why had concern become a threat to her? Why, in a house that should have been the safest, did a woman fear receiving even the smallest touch? I looked into Lena's eyes. Inside them was not just fear, but layers of resignation, built over years, like dust thickening over her spirit. She had learned to stay silent to survive. Rhea stood behind us, making no attempt to hide her irritation. Her gaze warned me not to interfere in their lives. But the more I looked at Lena, the more I understood that I could not stay silent. Not again. I lowered her arm and tried to steady my breathing, though a storm was forming inside me. The bruised arm, the trembling voice, the terrified retreat. Everything was fitting together into a picture I didn't want to see, yet couldn't deny. In my mind, one question rose heavy and cold enough to numb my spine. Who hurt Lena? Derek, Rhea, or both of them? I stood in the middle of the living room, where the warm yellow light seemed to hide the decay seeping through every tile. Lena stayed behind me, her arms wrapped around herself, her breathing shallow. And Derek, the son I once raised with the best parts of me, sat on the couch like a man guarding a prisoner in his own home. I looked straight at him, my voice low with restrained anger. "Who hit your wife, Derek?" Derek lifted an eyebrow, wearing a sneer I had never seen on him when he was young. "My wife is mine to discipline, that's all." Each word dropped into my chest like stone. He spoke as if Lena were an object that needed polishing. I heard Lena's breath shorten, and a cold fire crawled up my spine. I stepped closer, eyes locked on Derek. What kind of discipline leaves bruises from her neck to her shoulder? Derek laughed, the sound dry and hollow. "Don't exaggerate, Mom. She's fragile, so she bruises. End of story." I wanted to slap that laugh off his face, but my hand shook with a different kind of anger, deep and quiet, the anger of a mother who had failed to stop her child from becoming cruel. He stood up, walked to a cabinet by the wall, pulled out a stack of papers and threw them onto the glass table. The pages slid toward me with a cold scrape. "Look, this house is mine now." I lowered myself to look. It was the transfer contract for the $5 million mansion. Lena's signature sat on the last page, distorted and uneven, as if written by someone too weak to hold a pen. The lines trembled, broken in places, like each stroke happened under pressure from a gripping hand. I turned to Lena. "When did you sign this?" Lena shook her head slightly, lips trembling, as if speaking would trigger someone's rage. Derek cut in, his voice dripping with hostility. "She signed when she had to. You weren't here. You left for 20 years. You think you still have the right to question anything I lifted." Each page examining every date. Every one lined up with the days Lena had messaged me, saying she was sick, then suddenly went silent for months. My fingers tightened on the papers, feeling as though I was touching the betrayal of my own blood. Rhea walked out of the kitchen, then wiping her hands as if cleaning off something filthy. Her eyes landed on me with the entitlement of someone who believed the house belonged to her. "Marissa, don't blame your son. He did exactly what he should. The girl signed because she wouldn't listen. She deserved it." Lena shrank a little, as if each of Rhea's words hit her ribs again. I stepped in front of her, blocking Rhea's gaze. "You think I'll let this slide?" Derek scoffed, folding his arms. "You have nothing. You left this country. You don't know anything about this house anymore." He didn't realize that the more he talked, the more he exposed. Overconfidence always leaves cracks. I set the papers back on the table, each sheet trembling in rhythm with my pulse. "You forced her to sign." Derek said nothing, but his silence confirmed everything. Rhea smirked. "She's weak, so she suffers. In this house, anyone who resists gets corrected." Her words chilled me. There was no doubt now, this house was a pit of cruelty, and Lena had been sinking in it for years. I straightened, pulling my phone from my pocket. Both Derek and Rhea tensed. Derek stepped forward, voice low with warning. "Who are you calling? It's better if you don't start trouble." I met his stare without blinking. A child who forgets who gave him life has no right to tell me what to do. His jaw tightened, his hands twitching at his sides. I pressed a single number. The line connected after 2 rings. A deep voice answered. "Marissa, is it time?" I looked at Derek, then at Rhea. "Yes, I need you here." "Are you certain? It's been 20 years. Everything I prepared for 20 years is for this moment." He paused, then said, "I'm coming." I ended the call and slipped the phone away. Derek gritted his teeth. "Who did you just call?" I didn't answer. The look in my eyes was enough. When I turned to Lena, she whispered, voice breaking, "Mom, who is he?" I placed a hand on her shoulder. Someone Derek never wants to face. The words had barely left my mouth when the sharp screech of brakes echoed at the front gate, cutting through the thick air of the house. Someone had arrived, and this arrival would change everything. The sound of brakes at the gate echoed sharply, and memory surged through me like a cold wind. 20 years ago, I had stood trembling at the door of a shelter for abused women, arms wrapped around wounds still bleeding. Alden was the one who pulled me out of that darkness. He told me a sentence that changed my entire life. Without documents to protect you, fists will always win. From that day, he helped me rebuild the broken half of my life, taught me how to stand using the law instead of fear. And when I left the United States, he was the one who forced me to prepare every backup file in case life tried to crush me again. I never imagined that 20 years later, those papers would be used to save my daughter-in-law. I held my phone and stepped toward the window, my voice low but hard as iron. "Alden, I need you. Now." He picked up almost instantly, his breathing steady and deep as always. "Something happened, didn't it? I saw everything. Lena was beaten, stripped of her rights. The house transfer signature twisted. Derek and Rhea have turned her into a servant." There was silence on his end for a few seconds, then Alden's voice sharpened like a blade. "Keep them inside the house. Don't let anyone touch Lena. I'm bringing 20 years of your documents. I'm on my way." I clenched the phone. Those were the only words that stopped my hands from shaking. When I returned to the living room, Derek's expression had changed, as if he sensed that whatever was coming would not favor him. He crossed his arms, trying to hold on to dominance. "Mom, go stay at a hotel. This house is full." Lena startled, her head lowering instantly. Rhea tilted her head in agreement, as if they held the authority to arrange space in the house I had paid for with every drop of sweat. I stepped forward, my voice sharp enough to ring against the stone floor. "This $5 million house that I bought, and you dare say there's no place for me?" Derek stiffened, but before he could speak, I continued, cold as cracking ice. "If it's truly full, let me clear out the things that don't belong here first." The silence that followed compressed itself into the room, heavy enough that Lena instinctively grabbed my sleeve. Perhaps she had never seen me speak to Derek with this voice. As for Rhea, her face blanched briefly before she quickly pulled her arrogant mask back on. Derek snapped with irritation. "What does that mean?" I stared at him, letting him see for the first time in 20 years the mother he believed had disappeared. "You'll know soon." I stepped back toward the front door, feeling the footsteps outside grow closer. Each step struck against old memories, reminding me that this day was always meant to come. The years of running the sealed documents I had signed, the quiet conversations between Alden and me, everything was unlocking. Lena gently tugged my arm, her voice thin like wind slipping through a crack. "Mom, can that person really help me?" I held her hand, giving her a fragment of the hope Alden once gave me when I thought I had no future. Today, you are no longer alone. He'll make sure they understand that. Rhea let out a mocking laugh. So some old man is going to save her? Give us 5 minutes with him and he'll learn his place. I looked at Rhea, not with anger, but with a deep contempt. You have no idea who you're about to face. Derek stepped forward, standing between me and the door as if he could block fate with his body. You're going too far. You don't have the right to bring strangers into this house. I replied, my voice hard as forged steel. As a matter of fact, this is still my house. As soon as I said it, the doorbell rang, a long, heavy, commanding sound. It wasn't the arrival of a guest. It was the beginning of something larger. I looked straight at Derek and saw for the first time a flicker of fear in his eyes. And I knew exactly what awaited behind that gate. Alden had arrived. The door opened and Alden stepped in with a presence that made the entire room shrink. He didn't need to speak. His arrival alone made Derek lower his shoulders and Rhea avoid his gaze. Light from outside streamed behind him, highlighting the faint scar on his temple I had seen 20 years ago. It reminded me of the man who saved me when I thought my life was ending. Alden didn't look at me first. His eyes swept across the room like a judge examining a scene before questioning. He stopped in front of Derek, his voice deep and cold enough that I could feel Derek's breath falter. I've come to see what has been rotting inside this house. Derek narrowed his eyes, trying to assemble some sense of confidence. Who are you? Alden placed his briefcase on the table. The sound of the lock snapping open rang like metal striking metal. He didn't answer immediately, instead pulling out a chair and sitting across from Derek, hands folded like someone accustomed to high-stakes confrontations. My name matters less than the questions I'm about to ask. Derek let out a laugh, thin and shaky. I don't have to answer you. Alden tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharp enough to cut. The son of Marissa should answer. Derek jerked slightly. In that moment, he realized Alden didn't arrive as a visitor. He arrived as someone holding the truth Derek feared most. Alden opened the folder and pulled out 3 documents. The first question, who paid the property taxes for the past 3 years? Derek blinked. I did. Alden flipped to another page. Yet your bank account has never had a balance large enough to cover that cost. Derek opens his mouth, but no coherent words formed. Alden raised the second document. Second question, where does the money for your monthly expenses come from? Derek answered quickly, voice pitched too high. From the house, from my wife. Alden nodded slowly, but his eyes tightened. Lena has not had a personal account for 4 years. How did you obtain her money? The room seemed to drop into a lower register. Rhea turned away, though her shoulder stiffened. Derek glanced around, searching for an escape, but nothing in the room offered him shelter. Alden set down the final sheet. Third question. Why is Lena's signature in the house transfer contract crooked, warped, and trembling, as if written in fear? Derek planted his hands on his knees as though to stand, but his legs trembled. I don't know. She signed it, that's all. Alden didn't blink. Are you sure? The air stilled. Only Derek's breathing filled the space, short and uneven, like a man pushed to the edge. His hand clenched, then loosened, but he kept his face strained into defiance. He snapped back like a child shoved into a corner. I have the right to discipline my wife. Alden rose from his chair. I see your wife learning fear more than anything else. I turned to Lena. She stood motionless, but her eyes were wet and deep like a dark well. I walked toward her, intending to place my hand on her shoulder, but she shook her head. I asked silently with my eyes, and finally Lena spoke. her voice thin as a thread about to break. "He told me that you left me. That you didn't need me. That you left because I disappointed you." My chest tightened as if a piece of my heart had been torn away. I stepped aside to stare at Derek. The son I once held in my arms now stood there with a face full of excuses, his mouth opening as if searching for a lie, but no words could hide his guilt. Alden returned to his seat and opened his briefcase another inch. "Marissa, I've prepared for this day for 20 years. I'm only waiting for a single word from you." I looked once at Lena, long enough to see desperation, waiting for something, anything to end. Alden tapped the edge of the table, his gaze fixed on me. "I'll ask one last time, what level do you want to activate?" I took a deep breath, gathering all the pain, all the questions, all the years I had missed standing beside my daughter-in-law, and I said, "Red level." In that instant, everything inside the house seemed to freeze right before the truth was dragged into the open. The air in the room thickened the moment I said red level. Derek looked around like a beast, realizing the trap had already closed, his breath ragged and his hands shaking in the way people do when they are losing control. Rhea stepped back, yet her eyes gleamed with a kind of venom I had never seen. Lena stood behind me, her body shrinking as if trying to disappear from everyone's sight. I could feel that the truth we had just exposed had torn away the last mask Derek had, leaving him unable to hide anything anymore. He stepped forward, each stomp heavy enough to echo through the room. He didn't look at me or at Alden. He lunged toward Lena as if someone had snatched away something he believed he owned. I barely managed to turn and pull Lena closer before his hand clamped around her wrist. Derek let out a roar, his voice like the shriek of someone unhinged. "You belong to me." The sound tore through the house. Lena burst into tears without a sound, her face drained of color as Derek tightened his grip, her skin turning pale from the pressure. I rushed forward, reaching to pull him off her, but he shoved me aside so hard I staggered and nearly fell. Alden stepped forward, but Derek jerked Lena toward him like a shield. His grip tightened, his eyes bloodshot, as if violence was the only language he knew. Each breath Lena took was broken, strained, her voice rasping like someone struggling against drowning. Rhea stood behind him, and instead of stopping him, she spoke with a thrill in her voice, as if this was the spectacle she'd been waiting for. If she misbehaves, she needs to be taught. I turned toward Rhea, and for the first time I saw clearly what I had feared. She didn't merely enable this, she enjoyed it. She wanted Lena to hurt. She wanted Derek to dominate. She wanted this house to operate under their rules, rules where human worth no longer existed. Alden advanced, not quickly, but with the kind of steady force that bent the air around him. He placed himself between us and Derek, his gaze fixed on Derek with the calm of someone who knew exactly where the power now stood. "This ends here," Derek snarled. "Move. This is my family's matter." Alden didn't move. "You lost the right to say that." Derek yanked Lena again, making her cry out. I tried to rush forward, but Alden lifted his hand slightly, stopping me, like he feared for my safety. He stepped in, fully separating Derek from Lena with one swift and controlled motion. Derek stumbled back, but immediately tried to lunge again. Alden stood firm between us and him, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "From this moment forward, you are no longer a husband, no longer the owner of this house, and soon no longer a free man." The sentence hit the room like a verdict. Derek froze as if he couldn't believe someone dared say that to him. But when he saw Alden pull a credential badge from his pocket, panic flickered through his eyes. Rhea hurried forward, her voice cracking. "What are you threatening us with? This is our home. We have rights." Alden cut her off without looking her way. "No one has the right to abuse another person in a property under legal protection." Derek backed up 2 steps, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. He looked at me, at Lena, then at Rhea, searching for someone to anchor him. But in that moment, the house no longer belonged to him. Lena collapsed onto her knees, clutching the wrist he had squeezed. I bent down to lift her, feeling her body tremble like someone who had narrowly escaped a disaster. I whispered that everything was about to end, but her eyes looked at me with the fear of someone who no longer believed promises. Alden pressed a button on the device in his hand, the movement crisp and final. Derek jerked forward. "What did you just do?" Alden looked straight at him, the man who had just stripped himself bare to the law. Activating red level. The room seemed to freeze in that instant. Rhea's mouth fell open, Derek went still, and Lena drew short, shaking breaths. Then outside the gate, heavy, synchronized footsteps sounded rhythmic and powerful, like war drums announcing the inescapable. "Intervention team move in." The doors of the house trembled, and everything Derek had built in darkness for 20 years began to fall apart. The sound of radios echoed from the hallway. Then the front door swung open as a cold gust swept through the living room. Heavy, steady, authoritative footsteps filled the space, bringing with them the gray presence of federal law and the silence that comes with imminent danger. I held Lena closer as federal officers entered the house, the lights on their shoulders sweeping across the walls as if peeling away every layer of darkness Derek and Rhea had hidden for years. A female officer stepped before us, raised her badge to eye level, and spoke each word with clarity, her tone not loud, but weighted enough to shake the room. "All of you stay still. This house is under federal investigation." Derek stumbled back, his face draining of color in an instant. Rhea blinked rapidly, as though refusing to believe what was happening. I watched them, and for the first time since stepping into this house, I sensed evil beginning to tremble. Another officer pulled Lena away from Derek and guided her toward me. They examined the bruises on her arm with the eyes of people who had seen far too many victims, but were still hurt each time they encountered another. Derek tried to move between them, raising a hand as if to reclaim Lena. "Stay right where you are," a command cracked through the air like a hammer. Derek froze, but only for a moment, before he forced a twisted laugh, trying to craft a picture of a happy family out of thin air. "You're misunderstanding. Lena is happy. She sleeps with me. I'm her husband." Hearing those words made nausea rise in my throat. Rhea nodded rapidly, her mouth ready to interject, but a sharp look from a female officer silenced her. Derek's confusion and panic were peeling every lie off him layer by layer. He clung to the idea that marriage could erase violence, that a title could mask years of cruelty. The female officer stepped closer to Lena. She knelt to meet Lena's eyes, her voice softening but never losing its gravity. "Lena, I need to ask you something important." Lena looked at me, then at Alden, like a child caught between 2 cliffs. I squeezed her hand, giving her what little courage I could, knowing how long fear had lived inside her. The officer asked directly, without circling, without softening the blow, "Lena, where is your bedroom?" The house fell into silence. Rhea opened her mouth, intending to answer for her, but the officers raised a hand forbidding anyone except Lena to speak. Lena bit her lip until it bled. She stared at her bruised hands, then at the grand house I once sent them with nothing but love. Finally, her voice broke free, trembling like a flame about to go out. Under the stairs, a heavy stillness dropped into the room. Derek froze. Rhea stepped back, her face turning the color of ash. The officers exchanged glances, each look sharpening like a newly honed blade. I turned toward Derek. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Every lie he tried to cling to was collapsing around him. The female officer stood up, her voice carrying the weight of a verdict. "Check it immediately."
Officers split off at once and moved toward the space beneath the staircase, where the truth Derek had buried for years waited to be dragged into the light. And I knew that once that door opened, nothing in this house would ever be the same again.
The small door beneath the staircase opened with a dry crack, as if the space inside itself resisted being exposed to the light. I stood behind the officers, my heart beating slowly and heavily, as if each thud tried to drag me back in time to stop Lena from enduring this cruelty for 2 decades. The beam of a flashlight swept inside, striking yellowed walls, thick dust, and the coldness clinging to every dark corner. In the middle of the stained concrete floor lay a thin mattress, its edges damp and moldy, dark patches spreading like a sickness eating through the fabric. A torn blanket sat slumped beside it, loose threads hanging like the remnants of old wounds. The room was so small that 3 steps would reach the far wall, with no window and no ventilation, and every breath felt thick in my chest. Lena folded her arms tightly, her voice trembling like paper about to tear. 20 years now, Mom." I saw her shoulders droop as if 2 decades of memories trapped down here were crashing onto her all at once. An officer stepped toward the mattress, measuring the cramped space before shaking his head. Everyone present fell silent, stunned by a truth so harsh it pressed the air out of the hallway. Derek stood at the end of the corridor, his face pale, but his eyes still clinging to defiance. He stepped forward, irritation scraping through his voice. "She chose that place. She likes quiet, always has." Rhea jumped in, her voice sharp as a needle. "She's difficult. She's scared of light. We let her stay where she wanted." An officer turned sharply, the command slashing the air like a blade. "Enough. This is a forced labor scene. Everything you say will go into the report." Derek glanced around, searching for someone to cling to. Rhea stepped back, her hand trembling, yet her eyes still hunting for excuses to shift blame. I stood beside Lena, my heart tightening, as every image pieced itself together into a truth I had never imagined. The $5 million house I bought for her future had instead become her prison. Alden stepped forward, his voice steady, carrying authority that froze the entire hall. "I am Alden Pierce, federal legal advisor. You 2 have been monitored for a full year." Derek jerked upright. "Monitored? For what? We lived normally." Alden glanced toward the tiny room. "Normal? We have sound logs of nights, thermal imaging, financial audits, medical reports. They all say the same thing. This woman was confined, coerced to work, and abused over a prolonged period." Rhea opened her mouth to argue, but an officer lifted a hand to silence her. "You've stayed silent for too long. Today, you don't get to speak over anyone." Lena shrank against me, her breath unsteady. I placed my hand on her back, feeling the tremors running through her body like aftershocks of the 20 years she'd been buried alive. Her eyes drifted to the old mattress, the place where she forced herself to sleep just to avoid hearing the shouting upstairs. This tiny room was the evidence of every night she trembled, every tear shed with no witness. Another officer stepped out from the room with notes in hand. No ventilation, no privacy, no personal belongings. "This is illegal confinement." I turned to Derek, and for the first time, I saw every trace of arrogance vanish from his face. His eyes darted between me, Lena, and Alden like someone searching for an exit, only to find every doorway sealed. Alden opened the large file he had carried from the beginning, his voice dropping low. Derek Coleman, Rhea Coleman, you have violated 3 federal statutes involving domestic abuse, unlawful confinement, and property exploitation. Rhea gasped, shaking her head rapidly. No one confined her. She liked it there, I told you. Alden held her gaze. No victim ever chooses to live under a staircase. Derek clenched his fists, his jaw tightening like stone cracking. You don't understand our family matters. An officer stepped forward. The law understands, and the law has reached its conclusion. Lena trembled harder as police radios crackled through the hall, urgent signals announcing the next step in this 20-year reckoning. Alden closed the file, his eyes settling on the 2 people who had destroyed my daughter-in-law's life. It's time, he signaled to the federal team leader. The officer nodded, placing his hand on his radio. His voice came out as sharp and final as a gavel falling in court. Emergency arrest order. And in that moment, I knew the hell that had trapped Lena for 20 years was about to close forever behind her. The front yard of the $5 million house was packed with police vehicles, red and blue lights sweeping across every window as if cleansing the place. Neighbors crowded the walkway, their faces stunned. Those who once believed Derek was a successful, respectable man now stared at him with horror. Lena stood beside me, her hands still trembling, and I kept my hand on her shoulder as if to tell her the days she had been imprisoned were over. 2 officers escorted Derek out first, his handcuffs glinting under the lights. Alden stood next to a federal prosecutor, his voice firm as steel as he read the sentencing, each word striking down the years of violence Derek had tried to bury. Derek Coleman, the court sentences, 15 years for forced labor, 5 years for domestic abuse, 3 years for property fraud, 2 years for endangering life, total 25 years in prison, no parole. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Derek glared, trying to salvage the dominance he once held over Lena. But now his hands were locked, his movements restricted, and his eyes no longer inspired fear in anyone. He screamed desperation, cracking his voice. When I get out, you're all dead. I'll burn this house down. An officer behind him replied calmly, his tone cold and factual. You'll be 75 when you get out. Who exactly are you threatening? The neighbors exhaled, some with relief, some with rage, finally released. Derek turned away, but I saw tears fall, tears not of regret, but of a man realizing for the first time that he had lost all control. Rhea was brought out next. She neither cried nor yelled. Instead, she looked around as if expecting someone to defend her. But every neighbor avoided her gaze, stepping back as if she were something contaminated. A female prosecutor read her sentence, her tone calm yet cutting. Rhea Coleman, you were old enough to abuse, old enough to conceal crimes, and now old enough to go to prison. The court sentences 12 years incarceration. Rhea collapsed to her knees, muttering incoherently. She turned toward Derek as if seeking rescue, but he was being pushed into a police car, unable or unwilling to look back. Her whole life had been built on feeding on others' fear, and now she stood alone in her own. I turned to Lena. The flashing lights cast colors across her face, making her look both younger and unbearably exhausted. 20 years living under the staircase, working like a servant, beaten, humiliated, stripped of her dignity. And even as Derek was handcuffed and dragged away, she did not relax. She stood still, as if terrified the nightmare would begin again the moment she blinked. She tugged my sleeve, her voice soft and hoarse. Mom, am I really free now? Her question wasn't just words. It was the deepest wound of her life, a wound I knew would take years to close. I took her hand, ready to answer. But just then, a police officer rushed out of the house, breath quickened, as though he had discovered something that would shift the entire investigation. "Mrs. Marissa, we need you inside, now." And I knew justice for Lena was not finished yet. When the officer led me back inside the house, the red and blue lights outside the yard began to fade behind the glass. The $5 million home that once held so much darkness now seemed to breathe a new kind of air. Lena walked beside me, still small, but no longer shrinking into herself. 20 years of confinement, erasure, and deprivation had ended. But to begin a new life, she needed to take one more step. The step into the room that had been forbidden to her for her entire youth. I guided her up the stairs, each step like unlocking another layer of freedom she still feared was not real. The master bedroom door opened, light falling across the large bed, the dark wooden cabinets, and the paintings I had chosen when I first sent money to buy this house. The room was still beautiful, yet every object felt like a witness to the 20 years she had been forbidden to touch it. Lena stopped at the doorway, breath catching in her chest. Her hand rested on the frame, trembling like someone asking permission to enter her own life. "Mom, am I allowed to lie on the bed?" That question tore something inside me. In that moment, I realized Derek and Ria's cruelty was not only in bruises or forced labor, but in convincing Lena she had no right to exist as a person. I wrapped my arms around her and spoke slowly, firmly. "Lena, you're not just allowed to lie on it. You are the owner of this room." Her body trembled slightly, not from fear, but because a part of her long stolen was finally returning. Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time, they were not from pain. We stepped inside and opened the storage boxes shoved high into the attic, as if someone wanted to bury every trace of her. Old cloth-bound journals, wedding photographs tucked face down at the bottom, keepsakes she once cherished. Each item she lifted made her hands shake, as though she was touching her own lost youth. She clutched an old journal, her grip so tight the pages wrinkled. "Mom, they hid even me, even the things that reminded me who I am." I placed my hand on her back, giving her the strength she had been denied for too long. "Today, you take back each piece." We arranged the room again, laid fresh sheets on the bed, set the wedding photo back on its shelf, opened the window to let the wind sweep out the dust of time. Lena walked slowly around the room as if measuring her life again, every corner becoming a new boundary of freedom. When the room was bright, she sat on the edge of the bed, then slowly lay down. For the first time in 20 years, she lay on a bed that belonged to her. She turned toward me, her eyes shimmering, no longer only with fear, but with hope. "Mom, they won't come back, right?" I stepped toward the window and pulled the curtains aside, letting sunlight flood the room. Golden light washed over Lena's face, her bruised hands, and the old pain that was finally fading. Never. The 25-year sentence will keep them behind bars long enough for you to live in peace. Lena tightened her grip on my hand. Her fingers no longer trembled, they carried new life. I leaned down and whispered, like someone opening a new path for her future. "My child, your freedom is only beginning." The room fell silent, but not with fear. It was the silence of peace. Sunlight spread across the wooden floor, warming the space that had once been cold for so many years. Lena closed her eyes, breathing deeply and softly, like someone taking her first true breath with her own lungs. And in that moment, I knew her life had stepped into a new chapter, one untouched by Derek and Ria's darkness. Tomorrow, I will live again.